Hi, everybody. Welcome to the ones who've already joined. We'll still give it another few seconds for allowing other people to make the transition from the main stage to our INKtalk room. And we still see people coming up. Don't be surprised. Sometimes our eyes wander downwards. We have a little timer there to make sure that we start on time, finish on time. So that's what we're looking at the moment to give everybody the appropriate time. For those who are already in the chat, maybe we can use the time to highlight some of the technical functions that you have. There is a chat function where you can always post your questions during our INKtalk. We will then pick them up in the Q&A. And also there's the function of zooming. So you have the video feed and you have the presentation, and you can zoom them accordingly depending on what you want to enlarge. We recommend that for the Q&A, you decrease the size of the presentation, since we will not be bothering you with slides during the Q&A, but looking at your questions. So looking at the magic clock again, I want to extend my official warm welcome to INKtalk number 3. INKtalk number 3 is all about biorenewable packaging and its role in the circular economy, its potential, the sweet, but also its limitation, the sour. And of course, we will also touch on the roles of inks and coatings in this space, and especially the Q&A will give us the opportunity to dive into this once we've sort of set a joint system understanding of biorenewable packaging. So thank you for choosing this INKtalk, and welcome online. It's a great pleasure to have Anja with me as well. Anja is a dear colleague, and she will be guiding you through the sweets and sour, really tickling your taste buds today. We are here digitally, online, for reasons all of us know. However, we're also always close to you as a company. There are more than 5,000 CQVACers around the globe, and the next one is basically right around the corner. And since circular economy is part of our strategy, all of them will be eager to discuss circular solutions with you, of course, including the topic of biorenewable packaging. So I think we can get started. As mentioned, this INKtalk is about really exploring the space of biorenewable packaging. This is really important because only then we create understanding and can figure out when and how and where to apply biorenewable packaging, because it is one angle of the solution space of circular packaging, but it's not the only, and it has its sweets and sours. To kick us off, let's start with a joint understanding of biorenewable packaging. You will have many different definitions, so it's always important to sort of set the scene and make sure we speak the same language. Biorenewable packaging is made, of course, of biorenewable materials. These are defined as coming from the biosphere, simply put, nature. But since you just heard Layla talk, you all know what a biosphere is. There's another important aspect to it, that they are renewed during annual vegetation periods. The word annual is actually pretty critical in here because it indicates at a rather short time frame. So if we talk about biorenewable materials, we don't talk about a renewable cycle of many hundred years, but really within seasons. As mentioned, biorenewable materials are the building blocks of biorenewable packaging. And if we talk about biorenewable packaging, there are 3 archetypes that we like to distinguish. The first one is bioplastics. This is one of the most debated topics in the biorenewable space. Some see it as the silver bullet for leakage. Others see it as a pathway to lower the overall footprint of a packaging. What if that is true and what if that is false is what Anja is also going to uncover in the sweets and sours. Within the bioplastic space, there are basically 2 streams you can look at. You have the drop-in plastics. Those can mix easily with conventional plastics because they have the same chemical structure. A popular and really good example is the PET bottle. If you want to lower the overall footprint of that PET bottle, you can use drop-in PET, drop-in bio-PET. And you can even mix it with recycled PET, really opening the space for a sustainable PET bottle. The other stream is dedicated bioplastics. Those offer a standalone alternative to conventional plastics. Standalone because they are different from the chemical perspectives than their conventional counterparts. Famous examples are PLA, for example, but also PHA is moving more and more into the space and has found some recent attention. Well, we discuss bioplastics a lot because it promises something. It's actually still rather a niche. Of today's market, only 1% of plastics is actually covered by bioplastics in the packaging space. Really a niche. However, if we look at growth rates, the picture changes a little bit. Last year was actually the first year where bioplastics had a higher growth rate than conventional plastics. And this is quite significant if you consider that last year was also the year of super low oil prices, and hence it was really difficult to compete on an economic level against conventional plastics. If bioplastics are a niche, alternatives are the niche. Alternatives include materials from mushrooms, seagrass, algae, and the list goes on. There are great minds innovating this material space. While they definitely don't have the maturity yet of other materials, they are a proof point on how quickly this area is developing and that it's important to have an eye on it, and that circular economy requires innovation. Also, Anja will touch upon a few of the other innovation areas. And then there's the veteran of biorenewable packaging, paper and board. So common we almost forget that it falls within this category. But it's really important to consider it as well, because again, we want to open the solution space of materials and packaging design to really find the right packaging for the use case and for the system that you're feeding it into. So before I hand over to Anja for the sweets and sours, we want to hear from you. Based on what you know about biorenewable packaging today and sort of the joint definition that we've established, what potential do you see in biorenewable packaging for circular economy? Anja will open the poll and it's already up on your screens. You can now choose between A, very high potential, all the way down to E, very low potential. And this will give us a good indication on where we're starting off in this group. Please also remember that you do have the chat function. You can put your questions in there at any time and we'll pick them up in the Q&A. Feel free to make use of that. Also, if there are really specific questions you might have, please feed those into the Q&A as well. It gives us the opportunity to follow up with you after the INKtalks. So let's see, what's the vote count?
Well, I think we can give it a few more seconds. So votes are coming in.
Perfect. We want to make sure that everybody has a chance to poll.
Hey.
Should we give it a go?
Yes.
Let's see. Oh, interesting group. So we actually have quite a wide spread here, from people being highly optimistic to people seeing a very low potential. And then there's the largest space of seeing a high potential or medium potential. So let's see if that picture changes once Anja has taken you through the sweet and sours. So with no further ado, I'll hand over.
Thank you, Alina. So first, let's have a look at the sweet side. The sweet side, or the huge advantage of biorenewable packaging, is that it allows us to decouple from fossil sources. This is relevant as we are seeing a huge virgin plastic gap. This gap has several reasons. One reason is that we are facing an increased demand for packaging. At the same time, we face material losses within the existing recycling streams. These losses are significant. They are about 50%. That means virgin material input is needed to maintain high-quality recycling loops. And to serve this increased demand and to compensate these losses, biorenewable materials can play an important role within the circular economy. To make this more visible, let's have a look at some numbers. So in this chart here, you can see in the red bar that the projected virgin plastic demand for 2040 is about 430 million tons. That's a huge amount, and this is the amount that we will reach if we stay on our current pathways. So how could we change our pathways? First, we can reduce the virgin plastic need in general. This we can do, as you can see in the light green bar, by reducing the sparing through eliminating, reducing, reusing, and recycling virgin plastic. And by doing this, we could spare around 178 million tons. However, this still leaves us with a huge gap. So here is where biorenewables can come into play. As you can see in the two dark green charts or bars, that altogether around 71 million tons could be replaced by either paper packaging substrates or biorenewable substrates. These interventions, however, are the best guess from today's available technology. Still, there's a very huge gap open for remaining virgin plastic demand, as you can see in the blue bar. And this is where the future innovation space of a circular economy lays. Within this innovation space, we should apply all levers of a circular economy in combination. So reduce, reuse, recycle, and the deployment of biorenewable materials as virgin input. So biorenewable sources can be of the most valuable proposition, but it also comes with limitations. And this is where the sour side is or lays. So let's discover this a bit further. It can be of sour taste that using biorenewable materials does not relieve us from a managed end of life. This becomes more clear if we look at the different substrates. Paper, for instance, comes from a biorenewable source. However, it's actually a technical material with an existing recycling stream. So if we develop a paper packaging, we also always need to think about its recyclability. Although recycling may be the first choice for paper, under some conditions, also composting can be a solution. Of course, when we design compostable paper packaging, we also need to design in decomposability from the beginning. Drop-in bioplastics have, as we've heard from Alina before, the same properties as their fossil counterparts. That's why they can be recycled within the existing recycling streams of plastic recycling. So what we also need to think about drop-ins is that they are not compostable. Dedicated bioplastics, on the other hand, have a fully different polymer structure and would rather destroy or damage the existing plastic recycling streams. Drop-in bioplastics are only compostable as of today's technology. So again, if we decide to create a paper packaging from dedicated bioplastics, we need to think about the compostability. Also, these plastics can be recycled, but only in dedicated own systems, which are not existent as of today. So looking at these different options of end of life, we see that the role of biorenewable materials in a circular packaging industry is not about packaging that can be littered into nature. It rather requires a managed end of life and a circular biorenewable packaging. So this is not the only sour we have. There's another one. Because using biorenewable materials also does not relieve us from a conscious choice of raw materials. Why is that? Aren't biorenewable raw materials always renewable, so always and endless available? Yes, they are, but only if we respect the natural boundaries of our planet. Remember, the Earth is a closed system, and only a certain amount of biomass can regrow every year. and also only if the conditions are right. So for instance, if there's enough sunlight, if temperatures are moderate, if there is enough fertile soil, or if there is enough fresh water. So that means to provide these conditions, nature needs time to regenerate. But too often we disregard this. For instance, it is said that we may have fertile soil left only for about 60 harvesting cycles. Imagine this situation in 60 years. No fertile soil would also mean no biorenewable materials. This means we should not use more resources than can regenerate and regrow every year. Otherwise, we would also exhaust our natural capacities. For that, choosing regenerative sourcing practices can be a tool. Knowing that sourcing decisions for biorenewables can be tricky, there are a few general pointers that can help us to navigate. And this becomes more clear if you have a look at the feedstock of biorenewable materials. So the majority of biorenewable sources as of today come from either agriculture or forestry. These sources have the highest market availability today. However, if there are no sustainable cultivation practices, these sources can be the least regenerative option. Compared to that, byproducts from the agriculture or from forestry are considered as a more valuable source because they would be waste anyways. However, their market availability is still low or still under development. Additionally to that, there are other sources under research or in very early stages. So for instance, using, as Alina said before, algae or mushrooms or seaweed as a basis for substrates, or even byproducts from the food industry or from the organic waste. The latter materials have a higher chance of being regenerative and in line with the planet's natural boundaries. So, after all that's sour, shall we actually take biorenewable materials for packaging? We say, yes, we should, and we can do it together. Biorenewable packaging can be truly sweet if we think it fully circular. And for this, Siegwerk is your partner. We have a deep understanding about the system, from the raw material input side as well as from the end-of-life perspective. And we have the expertise in enabling biorenewable packaging that is circular. That means we can support you first choosing the best substrate. And when it comes to a biorenewable substrate, we can also offer inks and varnishes that enable this circular biorenewable packaging. Let's have a look at two concrete examples. One example is a paper cup that is designed for the paper recycling stream by eliminating the inner plastic layer with a printed barrier coating. Also, both ink and coating have a higher biorenewable content. Another example is a herb wrap made from PLA, which is designed for the composting stream. So also the ink applied here fulfills the strict criteria of OK Compost certification schemes. These are just two examples that show how important it is also for biorenewable packaging to think through the entire solution space and to create a packaging that is fully circular. So that was about the sweet and sour, and I will hand over to Alina again for a short summary.
Perfect. Thank you, Anja. So in essence, there is a space for circular biorenewable packaging. And it's important that we have this in our solution portfolio because ultimately it offers us virgin feedstock that is decoupled from fossil materials. And as Anja pointed out, we are in dire need of new feedstock, of new virgin material. However, in order to really make this regenerative and circular, we have to be aware of the sours. The first one was that we have to think about the end of life. So recycling or composting. Even if it would be nice, biorenewable packaging is not a silver bullet or a license to litter. The second is thinking about the sourcing. So where does the material actually come from? Here, in order to really have this as a long-term solution, we should look at regenerative sourcing practices. And while the single decision there is sometimes complex, Anja presented a few very good pointers that way around. And if we take that into consideration, then we should definitely move towards more biorenewable packaging. And we can do this together. What better way to kick off moving into the space together than by a Q&A? And before we do that, once more, I want to remind you that there is the chance to ask questions right now. And if the chat stays a little slower, we have some additional aspects, especially on inks and coatings, prepared that we will share within the Q&A. Before we move to that, however, we want to hear from you once more. Now that you've learned about sweets and sours as well, and really got a system understanding, how interested are you in practically exploring biorenewable packaging for your company? The little box already appeared on your screen. Again, A stands for very high interest, and E stands for very low interest. I'm really curious to see how the spread is after the talk. And while the votes are coming in, we want to say thank you. And please feel free to always reach out, either to us personally, you have our personal email addresses, or use one of the many digital platforms that are a channel to ZQuack. We'll make sure to get back to you. So giving everybody a bit more chance to log in their answer. How does it look?
It's published.
Oh, it's published. That happens when you turn around. Okay, interesting. So we've definitely moved the critic out of the very low interest. So that is hopefully an achievement, and it looks fairly well. So while there's still some skeptics in the room, and because we presented some sours for good reason, there is sort of some drive to explore this space. And with that, why don't we kick off the Q&A? And I think we have the first question in the chat.
Yes. Let me just read it. So some biorenewable materials have a higher carbon footprint than fossil materials. Would you still recommend them as an alternative?
Yep. So very good question, and probably one of the hardest. What is the really comparable carbon footprint of the different solutions out there? In general, it is unfortunately a case-by-case assessment through, for example, a life cycle assessment. However, if you remember sort of the two components that we mentioned with regards to circularity, we would recommend biorenewable packaging because you can actually lower the footprint. One of the main drivers of the footprint, for example, in the biorenewable space, is the energy consumption in the production phase. Transforming a starch into a plastic is highly energy intensive. If you would only look at that, biorenewable material would fare actually worse than a fossil-based counterpart. However, if you look at the sourcing aspect, the picture already changes. Sourcing oil is one of the most harmful methods that we have in sort of messing with our planet, and they actually are becoming increasingly worse if you think about fracking and also moving into new parts of oil fields. So the picture already changes. And then as a last step to really make this work is that we remember to really feed back the material in the system also with renewable packaging. And that, again, improves the footprint for biorenewable packaging. So long story short, if you apply the criteria of circularities, I'm convinced that in most cases, biorenewables will fare better than their fossil-based counterparts. Of course, doing that sometimes still is a challenge.
Yes, and maybe to also add to this, that because this question very good emphasizes that not every biorenewable material is sustainable per se. So there's, it's fully right that we always need to consider and think about where does this material come from, and is it truly circular? So has it an intended end of life? So there always must be actually an assessment or about what are the impacts of a biorenewable packaging, and do we really reach this reduced carbon footprint? So there is no clear yes and no answer. It always depends on the case. So we always need to be aware that it's not per se a reduced footprint.
Yeah, and maybe one more thing, because that often comes up in the discussions, would you choose either fossil-based or biorenewable? In most of the cases, if we really think about a circular packaging system, it is an and, because of course, there are cases where we want to feed biorenewable feedstock into a fossil-based feedstock. And we want to use any fossil-based that is in the system as much as possible, and then sort of add biorenewables to that.
Yeah, so I think the conclusion to this question is there's no one-fits-all solution. So it always depends on the case. So coming to the next question. Which goal do you recommend to improve a package more sustainable? Is it footprint, reduce material, life assessment, or any other? So,
good question. So can you repeat that three once more?
So which goal do you recommend to improve a package more sustainable? Mm-hmm. Footprint, reduce material, or life cycle assessment?
Yeah. I think they're not decoupled. They sort of, I think, belong in the same box. So by eliminating packaging components, you've ultimately improved the footprint and hence the LCA. The LCA, so the life cycle assessment, is sort of a scientific value of the footprint. So that's sort of how these two tie together. And sort of as mentioned in the keynote, thinking about how can you reduce packaging in the first place is the first key step, or packaging components. Because if you remember also the gap that you showed in your graph, and I can't recall the number, the blue bar, there's no way we can really move to sort of a circular space without also looking at reducing.
Yeah, so it's about applying all circular economy levers: reduce, reuse, and recycling. And when it comes to new virgin need that is not yet in the system, then we should think about, are biorenewables a better option? And if yes, we should use them. So, okay, we have a third question. When biorenewable material breaks up, it forms water, heat, and carbon dioxide. Why should a composting factory use this material? It brings them no benefit in terms of soil.
Exactly. We couldn't summarize it better. And that is sort of one of the key reasons why we often say that recycling is actually the more preferable end-of-life option in a circular economy, because you actually keep the material in the system. You keep the economic, but also sort of the material value in the system. Composting doesn't have this advantage. I don't think I can add more. It's a perfect summary of what happens in the composting process, and why recycling is.
Yeah, maybe to add on this, that's why we also always need to consider if composting is the best choice for an end of life, because there are niche applications where it makes sense. For example, if food is wrapped by a packaging, so for instance a coffee pad or a ketchup pouch, where the food is really covered or fixed into the packaging. So when we have food in a packaging, then it can be of value for the compost, because then the packaging can disappear or not interfere with the composting, and then the food inside would contribute. So this is why we say it's a sensible niche for a compostable packaging. Otherwise, we always say most biorenewable materials also are recyclable. Think about paper or the drop-in bioplastics. So for this, recycling streams already exist, and this also should be an option to further enhance for these biorenewable materials.
thank you for pointing that out, because that's really important. If we look at composting applications, it should also be packaging applications that do not have a well-functioning recycling stream, so we don't take away from the recycling stream. And the examples you mentioned are spot on, because these would be packaging formats that without composting would end up in a landfill or be incinerated. So an entire loss. And with composting, we can at least feed the organic waste that is still in it into the process.
Yeah. So next question is about bioplastics that would compete with the food production. So what would be our opinion about this?
Yep. Do you want to take it, or should I?
Yes. So that's for sure a critical argument. So far, so there are a few points. So far, bioplastics have a very, very huge share of the entire industry. As Alina said before, it's 1% of the entire plastic production, and also a very, very low percent of the agriculture cultivation that is done today. So for today, mostly there is no food competition, because still there is enough arable land for both. So for the 99% for food and the 1% for the plastics. However, if you look in the future, then this may change. As I've said before, we have natural boundaries, and once we switch more and more to biorenewables, we also need to consider what would be the best source for either food or the industry or industrial applications. And this is where also this innovation space comes in. Of course, first we need to produce nutritions for humans. This is I think a priority for us all. And then once we know how to make these polymers or how to use fiber substrates, we can go further and further and think about new sources. So as we've mentioned before, using the byproducts from the agriculture, or going even further and think about totally new sources that come up that could help us to do both agriculture for food and other industrial sources or biorenewable sources coming from microorganisms, for example, through fermentation or based on these algae production. So there are already research going on to switch from these crops and from forestry to other sources. And I think it will be really exciting to see what is going on in future and what sources we may have, which we can't think about for today. But for sure, it's a critical question that we also need to consider when we choose these raw materials for biorenewables. So we have another question. In current circumstances, recycled food packaging ends up in downstream, as only virgin material can be used for food contact. Do you see chemical recycling as a solution? For the moment, we still need new material intake, as we pointed out, to compensate these losses.
Good question. And again, one where the answer is yes and. So if we look at the recycling stream at the moment, and sort of we're in the plastic space right now, then there is still significant improvement that we can do with mechanical recycling to actually allow sort of food grade recyclate, and hence using it for food grade again. Hot washing processes in the mechanical recycling stream paired with the inking, for those who had the pleasure of looking at that INKtalk, is definitely one of them. And that the value contribution for that will be significant. Nonetheless, there will still be a part that cannot be recycled in the mechanical recycling process. Think about these really hard to abate packaging structures with laminates, or that are so small that they actually do not really make it into the mechanical recycling process because it's not economical. Here, chemical recycling has to be part of the solution picture. Why we don't see it as sort of the only solution is because chemical recycling has a worse, or in general, a worse energy footprint than mechanical recycling has. Plus, sort of the CAPEX and the OPEX is higher too. So it wouldn't make sense to sort of move everything to chemical recycling, but rather look at where can we intensify and increase and make mechanical recycling better. And then for whatever is not covered by that, apply chemical recycling. And I think that's also what the bar chart nicely showed. The bar chart that you saw earlier is really based on technologies that are ready for market today. If we sort of think ahead of the innovation space, that will cover innovation in recycling and especially also in collection. So much of materials lost during the collection processes and in the material space of biorenewable packaging. And we need all of that to really make the picture circular.
Yes, so I see maybe another question coming in. So we have 5 more minutes for our session.
Time flies.
So please feel free to add another question. So this would be the chance to talk to us or write to us, and we talk back to you. Otherwise, let me switch to our contacts again. Oops.
Yeah.
Wrong direction.
And maybe while you do that, one topic that also comes up frequently is sort of when does it make sense to increase the biorenewable content of inks and coatings? And maybe to just briefly touch on that, you can basically look at it from 2 perspectives. One, as a converter, for example, you want to improve your overall supply footprint, your sourcing footprint. Here, as inks and coatings are part of your supply chain, we can look at how can we make choices in the portfolio to really help you increase your sourcing footprint. This is, however, independent of really enabling a circular packaging. That is the second stream. And when we talk about enabling a circular packaging, the biorenewable content of the ink actually has quite a limited role to play because it's only 3 to maximum 10% of overall packaging. So we're really looking at how can we enable the circularity of that biorenewable packaging. For example, if we think about the barrier coating, it might not make sense to increase the renewable content in that barrier coating because it limits functionality and hence is not really a good substitute for the PE liner. So things like that is what we look at and consider as well as the enabling factor. And one thing that we put a lot of effort into last year, or the sustainability and PSR team, is creating transparency. So what we did last year was for every new raw material that we add to our portfolio, we request a biorenewable content. This allows us now to give an answer on the biorenewable content on any ink formulation through the SAP system. And transparency is the first important step. And I think that's really important. And then we can decide together, does it make sense to increase it?
Okay. So 3 more minutes, and I try to read the question. So how do you see the consumer position on the plastic issue and the role of industry in shaping and educating the consumers? We went through a circle from plastic is bad to bioplastics is great to bioplastic is bad due to microplastic in water and soil. Now the focus seems to be on fiber-based barrier-coated packaging in bioplastics. The consumer perceive it through as the greenest.
Yeah. Well, what does the consumer perceive as the greenest? Difficult to say, and there's also very limited data. I think I would rather turn it around and ask, how can we make sure that the consumer does not pick something that is marketed as green, but maybe actually not be a really good solution, but that the consumer has clarity about the choices in the grocery store. And one example I can just give is you sometimes still find packaging that is labeled as biodegradable. It's impossible for a consumer to assess what to do with this packaging at the end of life, or is it good or is it bad? If you see the word biodegradable as a normal consumer, you just think, great, this is green, and it's sort of, if I throw it into nature, it will go back to nature. This, of course, is not the case. So what we really have to do as an industry is move to clear labeling to say, okay, this is a packaging that is okay for industrial composting if you have that waste management stream. or say, this is a film, a bioplastics film that is recyclable. He can't see it. So really putting the consumer into a position to have that clarity, I think is essential. And then the topic of what is the greener is probably for the consumer almost impossible to judge. That is, I think, our role and our responsibility. And even for us, I mean, it is difficult to find the best answer. So we should take that off the table for the consumer.
Yeah, I think it's always about awareness rising and starting to think into or through the entire system and not doing the cherry picking. What would be the easiest or the easiest way on the first assumption, but really thinking into what is the system and where do we work into and what would be the best solution for this specific system. So I think this is the conclusion on this.
And when you're looking at the clock, just one last thought on sort of the consumer. A consumer can only make the right choices if transparency is given. And I think labels are one thing. We talked about, compost, cradle to cradle, but also material passports could be part of the future. So looking at the time, we're seeing a big red button blinking.
It's over.
Thank you so much for joining. It was great discussing biorenewable packaging with you online, and we hope to continue this discussion. And for now, enjoy the last part of the Ink Day. We will definitely enjoy it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Bye. Take good care.
Goodbye.